What's up, guys? Welcome to Linux Bash Scripting Intermediate Level, a course by coding-bootcamps.com. I'll be your instructor, Kevin Downs. A little bit about myself. I'm a Red Hat Certified System Administrator, or RHCSA, and at my current job, I'm in charge of administering hundreds of servers running on different Linux distributions. I work as a Unix system administrator supporting several large enterprise-level clients with IBM across multiple environments. As an RHCSA, I'm an adept at Linux programming for managing both personal and server Linux systems. Currently, I'm pursuing my Red Hat Certified System Engineer and DevOps. So some prereqs for this class, guys. Make sure you've taken Intro to Linux OS and Intro to Linux Bash Scripting. The things we learned in both of those classes are fundamental and vital to the things we're going to be learning in these classes. So make sure you follow these links. If you haven't taken those courses yet, take those courses, then come back and we'll keep going with this course. So today we're going to be talking about Korn shell and bash shell programming. So the outline for today, we're going to be comparing popular shells, talking about Korn shell compatibility for bash, Korn and bash shell advantages, Korn and bash shell disadvantages, versions of Korn shell and bash, shell command, syntax, comments, continuing command on multiple lines, special characters, pattern matching, complex pattern combinations, and tilde expansion. Let's go ahead and get started with comparing popular shells. So most Linux distributions include the bash shell by default. But you could also switch to another shell environment. Z shell is a particularly popular alternative, and there are other shells like A shell, K shell, dash, fish, and TC shell. Okay. When you sign in the command line or launch a terminal window on Linux, the system launches the shell program. Shells offer a standard way of extending the command line environment, and you can swap out the default shell for another one if you like. If you'd like to read more about that, you can go ahead and follow this link here. And you can dive in a little bit further about these different shells. By default, guys, bash shell is what's going to be used on our lab environment, as well as many environments that you'll encounter. And it's also one of the most popular and commonly used is bash shell. Okay. So let's talk about the compatibility for Korn shell to bash. So K shell or Korn shell and bash are shells in the field of computer programming, and they each have their own set of commands and features. K shell and bash shell are somewhat related to each other, since K shell encompasses the feature of the .sh or Bourne shell, the predecessor of the bash shell. Both have programmable shells and command processes in Linux and Unix computer systems, and they also carry out commands via a keyboard terminal or from a file. K shell is also known as the Korn shell, as I have said previously, and Korn shell was developed by David Korn. And it attempts to merge the features of fellow shells like the C shell, TC shell, and Bourne shell. It allows the developers to create new shell commands when needed. Bash also acts as an extension of the Korn shell, since it incorporates the features of the latter with some added features. So let's talk about the advantages between those two. So the Korn shell was developed many years before the emergence of the bash shell. Because it is older than bash, it has fewer resources, and it also attracts a limited scope of computer users. So to compensate, the Korn shell has released different versions like PDK shell, which is public domain K shell, and MK shell, which is a modification of the PDK shell. There's also K shell 88 and the most recent K shell 93. The Korn shell has associative arrays and handles the loop syntax better than the bash shell does. The Korn shell's printed command is also better than the bash echo command. The shell's rhistory command allows a quicker process of doing a rerun of older commands. So let's talk about the versions of shell and bash. Shell, or the shell command language, is a programming language described by the POSIX standard. So guys, you might be familiar with like C# or C++, and other things like that. In Linux, SH is similar to those in the fact that it's a programming language, right? Shell.sh. It has many implementations such as K shell 88 dash and others. Bash can also be considered an implementation of shell. Because shell is a specification, not an implementation, /bin sh is a symlink or hardlink to an actual implementation on most POSIX systems. Ultimately, it's up to you to decide which one to use by writing the shebang line as the very first line of the script. So a couple things I want to mention. First is bash stands for born again shell. Okay, in case you're wondering what that stood for. And again, it's one of the most popular and common shells used. And this shebang is also known as the hash spling, okay? It's the very first thing you see at the beginning of all scripts, and we're going to see that later. Basically, it just tells the loader what interpreter to use when writing your shell, or your script, okay? So it'll read that line, it says, okay, I'm using bash shell, or corn shell, Z shell, fish shell, or one of those shells, and it'll interpret it as such. So we're going to talk about the syntax for the shell command. So any shell can be used for writing a shell script. To allow for this, the first line of every script is hashtag or pound, exclamation point, and then the path to the shell, okay? So this is the shebang, or also known as the hash spling, okay? The pound, exclamation point characters tell the system to locate the following path name, start it up, and feed it to the rest of the file as input. Any program which can read comments from a file can be started up this way as long as it recognizes the hashtag or pound sign as a comment convention. The program is started, and then the script file is given to it as an argument. Because of this, the script must be readable as well as executable. Some examples of this are Perl, Awk, TCL, and Python.